Raymond Burr was a legend on screen, but off-screen, he was practically a ghost wearing a mask of his own creation. He played characters who stood for truth and justice. Yet much of his own life was built on a foundation of carefully told lies. And here's what makes it even more fascinating. None of it stopped him from becoming one of the most beloved faces on television. In fact, some might say the mystery only added to the magnetism. When Burr stepped into the role of Perry Mason, the unstoppable TV lawyer who never lost a case, he didn't just play a character. He became one. To millions of Americans, he was justice. Calm, brilliant, unshakable. But the man behind that commanding presence, that was someone entirely different. Born in 1917 in British Columbia, Burr's early life was marked by turbulence. His parents split up when he was a child, and the family moved to California. From there, things start getting fuzzy. Burr would later tell interviewers stories about serving in World War II, being wounded multiple times, and even having a wife and child who both died tragically. The problem? None of it was true. No war records, no marriage certificates, no obituary for a son who supposedly died of leukemia. The stories were detailed, but they were fiction. And yet, the lies weren't sloppy. They were strategic. Burr carefully crafted a personal narrative that made him appear both heroic and heartbreakingly human. It wasn't just about privacy. It was about survival. In an era when being openly gay could destroy a Hollywood career, Burr created a public mask that audiences and gossip columnists ate up. It worked. For decades. What's wild is that all of this deception didn't make him look suspicious. It made him look more relatable. Journalists repeated his war stories as fact. Fans sympathized with his supposed loss. No one questioned the man who never cracked under cross-examination, even in real life. But this dual identity, the TV crusader for justice and the man who lived behind layers of falsehoods, raises a question that still lingers. Did Burr ever stop performing? Was there ever a moment when he got to be himself? His life, in many ways, mirrored the perfect legal drama, full of twists, buried secrets, and layers that peel back slowly. And just when you think you understand the man behind the legend, a new detail changes everything. But before we unravel the lies, let's talk about how Burr went from Hollywood's favorite villain to television's most trusted lawyer. Because his transformation was just as surprising and just as revealing. Before Raymond Burr was defending innocent clients on primetime television, he was the guy who made your skin crawl. In the 1940s and early 50s, Burr carved out a name for himself in Hollywood. Not as a hero, but as the heavy. He had the perfect look for it, broad-shouldered, brooding, and cold-eyed. If there was a ruthless gangster, a scheming husband, or a stone-faced killer in the script, chances are Burr was the guy cast to play him. One of his most memorable roles came in Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, where he played Lars Thorwald, a suspicious neighbor with a chilling secret. Even in a film loaded with tension, Burr stood out. He barely spoke, but you could feel the menace in every glance. Audiences didn't forget that face. And yet, just a few years later, that same face would become the symbol of unwavering integrity on television. So how did that transformation happen? By the mid-1950s, Burr was tired of typecasting. He played so many villains, producers didn't see him as anything else. But when CBS began casting for Perry Mason, Burr saw his chance, and he fought for it. Hard. Legend has it that the studio originally wanted him to play the prosecutor, Hamilton Berger. Burr said no. He wanted to be Perry, the lead, the guy who never loses. To prove he had what it took, Burr dropped 60 pounds and auditioned for the part with everything he had. When Earl Stanley Gardner, the author of the Perry Mason novels, saw Burr's audition, he reportedly turned to the producers and said, "That's Perry Mason." That was it. The role was his. The show debuted in 1957 and became an instant hit. Viewers couldn't get enough of Burr's calm intensity, his commanding voice, and the way he always seemed 5 steps ahead in the courtroom. Each episode was a tightly woven mystery, But Burr's performance was the glue. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. But he had something more powerful: quiet authority. And behind the scenes, Burr was relentless. He studied courtroom procedure. He memorized pages of legal jargon. He worked grueling hours to get every episode right. It paid off. Perry Mason ran for 9 seasons, earned Burr 2 Emmy Awards, and turned him into a national icon. This wasn't just a career shift. It was a reinvention. Burr didn't just change the roles he played. He rewrote how people saw him. The villain from Rear Window was gone. In his place stood television's most trustworthy man. It was almost like he'd put himself on trial and won. But the story doesn't stop there. Because just when everyone thought they had Raymond Burr figured out, he shocked the industry again with a bold move that made headlines and raised eyebrows. His next role would push boundaries, both on screen and off. Most actors would be lucky to land one iconic role in their lifetime. Raymond Burr? He had 2, and the second was even more daring than the first. After Perry Mason wrapped in 1966, Burr could have easily faded into rerun fame. He'd already become a fixture in American households. His legacy was safe. But Burr wasn't done, not by a long shot. A year later, he returned to TV in a role no one expected: a wheelchair-bound detective named Robert Ironside. If Perry Mason was all about courtroom brilliance, Ironside was about grit, street smarts, and determination. It was bold, raw, and it marked one of the first times in television history that a lead character was portrayed as physically disabled, but not limited. Burr didn't just play the part. He owned it. The show's premise was unique. Ironside, a former police chief, is paralyzed after an assassination attempt. Instead of retiring, he continues to solve crimes, using his sharp mind and unconventional tactics. It was a radical concept for 1967, and Burr made it work. What made this second role so compelling wasn't just the character's resilience. It was Burr's total transformation. Gone was the polished suit and courtroom swagger of Perry Mason. Ironside was gruff, sarcastic, and far more human. He was vulnerable but powerful, crippled but never weak. Audiences responded. Ironside ran for 8 seasons, nearly as long as Perry Mason. Burr received multiple Emmy and Golden Globe nominations, and once again, he became a symbol of strength on screen. But this time, the strength looked different. It was less about flawless wins and more about struggle, adaptation, and pushing forward despite limitations. Behind the scenes, Burr threw himself into the role. He worked closely with disability advocates to ensure his portrayal was respectful and accurate. He even kept weights under his legs during filming to make his physical stillness more convincing. It wasn't just a performance, it was a commitment. What's also telling is how Ironside allowed Burr to break out of the legal genre entirely. He went from defending fictional clients to chasing down real danger. And despite the physical constraint of the wheelchair, the character never came off as static. Burr managed to project intense motion, even without movement. By the time Ironside ended in 1975, Burr had achieved something few actors ever do: back-to-back stardom in 2 completely different roles. He wasn't just a courtroom hero or a TV detective. He was both. And through it all, he maintained that air of mystery, the quiet intensity, the sense that there was always more beneath the surface. But while Burr was dominating the screen, his personal life remained a carefully constructed puzzle. And the deeper you dig, the more surreal it gets. Because the truth behind Raymond Burr's private world, that was a drama all on its own. Raymond Burr didn't just play characters. He became them, on and off the screen. While the world saw a brilliant lawyer or a fearless detective, Burr was quietly constructing a completely different character in real life. The version of himself he wanted everyone to believe. It was a performance that spanned decades. Throughout his career, Burr told stories about himself that, on the surface, made him seem like a tragic romantic hero. According to his interviews, he'd been married once, to a beautiful Scottish actress who died of cancer after just a few months of marriage. He also claimed to have had a son who died of leukemia at age 10. Sometimes he spoke of war injuries he suffered while serving in the Navy during World War II, describing missions in Okinawa and heroics in the South Pacific. Here's the twist. Almost none of it was true. Investigators and biographers later try to track down records of his military service, his marriage, his child. They found nothing. No wife named Annette Sutherland. No death certificate. No records of a son. And while Burr had been in the military, he never saw combat. The wounds, the heartbreak, the fallen family, all invented. So why go to such great lengths? In a word, protection. Burr was a gay man living in an era where that truth could have ended his career overnight. Hollywood in the mid-20th century was ruthless when it came to image. Studio contracts often included morality clauses, and tabloids thrived on scandal. For someone as visible as Burr, staying closeted wasn't just a personal decision. It was a matter of survival. To throw off suspicion, Burr created a fictional past filled with just enough pain and romance to keep the press sympathetic but distracted. It worked. Journalists repeated his stories without digging deeper. Fan magazines praised him for his resilience. And Burr maintained the illusion flawlessly, never once breaking character. In private, he shared his life with a man named Robert Benavides, a former actor and later producer, who was by Burr's side for over 3 decades. But in public, Benavides was just a business associate. They owned an orchid farm together, started a wine label, and traveled extensively. But the true nature of their relationship was never acknowledged. It wasn't until after Burr's death in 1993 that the full truth began to emerge. And even then, many fans were stunned. How could someone who symbolized truth and justice have hidden such a massive part of who he was? But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the better one is this. What does it say about the times he lived in that he had to hide? Because while Raymond Burr lived in the spotlight, the real story was always happening just outside of it. And if you think his secrets ended there, there's still one more twist in the tale. As Raymond Burr quietly stepped away from the spotlight in the late 1980s, his life took a turn that no one could have predicted. Gone were the courtrooms, the stakeouts, and the flashing cameras. In their place, orchids, wine, silence. But even in those quiet final years, Burr remained a man wrapped in mystery. On the surface, it looked like the perfect retirement. Burr and his longtime companion, Robert Benavides, settled into a secluded estate in Sonoma County, California. It was a far cry from the studio sets of Los Angeles or the bustling TV world he once ruled. Together, they cultivated a sprawling orchid business, one that grew into one of the largest hybrid collections in the country. Thousands of rare and exotic flowers bloomed under their care. Burr wasn't just a name attached to the operation. He was hands-on. He memorized the species, experimented with hybrids, and even gave lectures on the subject. To those who visited the estate, he wasn't a TV legend. He was just a quiet, gentle man who loved plants. But beneath the surface of this calm new life, the secrets didn't stop. Even as the rumors about his personal life gained momentum, Burr refused to confirm anything. He never publicly acknowledged his relationship with Benavides. There were no tell-all interviews, no last-minute confessions. In fact, Burr's estate was carefully structured to avoid prying eyes. He left nearly everything to Benavides. Millions in assets, business interests, the orchid farm, and a vast collection of memorabilia. But there were no family members, no heirs to challenge it. Just silence. What makes it even more intriguing is that during this time, Burr was still working, just not the way people remembered. From 1985 to 1993, he reprised his role as Perry Mason in a string of made-for-TV movies. He filmed 26 of them, often while struggling with declining health. In his final appearances, you can see the toll. He's slower, heavier, visibly fatigued. But he never broke character. Even as he battled cancer, he kept filming. To the very end, he was Perry Mason. There's something haunting about that. Here was a man who spent his life creating stories, on screen, in interviews, even about himself. And when the final chapter came, he didn't offer a big reveal. He didn't try to rewrite his legacy. He simply faded into the quiet, surrounded by orchids, wine barrels, and the one person who had always been there, even if the world never knew the truth about their bond. In September 1993, Raymond Burr passed away from kidney cancer at the age of 76. The news made headlines. Tributes poured in, but the man himself left behind only what he wanted remembered. The rest, the hidden parts, the unspoken truths, remained untouched. But one question still lingers. How much of Burr's life was real, and how much was a masterfully crafted story? And even after death, Burr had one final mystery. One last move that would leave fans and insiders stunned. Raymond Burr never liked being told what he could or couldn't be. Not in Hollywood, not in life, and definitely not in death. Even in his final moments, he managed to deliver one last twist, the kind that Perry Mason himself would have admired. See, after decades of carefully shaping his public persona, of masking his private life behind tales of tragic loss and wartime valor, Burr didn't go out with a big statement. He didn't come clean in a late-night interview or leave behind a tell-all memoir. Instead, his final act was quieter and far more defiant. When the details of Burr's will were revealed, it left Hollywood whispering. Almost his entire estate, reportedly worth millions, was left to one man, Robert Benavides. No surprise there to those closest to him, but to the world? It was confirmation of what many had only speculated. No mention of the fictional wives, no lost children, just a single, unmistakable truth. Burr had spent his life with the person he loved, regardless of what the world expected or allowed. It wasn't a loud declaration. It was more powerful than that. It was intentional silence, a final refusal to let the industry that had typecast, controlled, and censored him define how his story ended. And even after his death, the layers of mystery continued. There were rumors that Burr had left behind hidden journals, private letters, or documents that might finally reveal the full scope of his fabricated past. But if they existed, they never surfaced. Benavides, ever loyal, never offered public confirmation or commentary. He honored Burr's legacy the way Burr had lived it, quietly, respectfully, and completely on his own terms. And that's what made Raymond Burr different from so many other stars. Most actors leave behind fame, fortune, maybe a scandal or two. Burr left behind a riddle. He played America's most famous truth seeker, while concealing the deepest truths of his own life. He projected strength on screen, while hiding how vulnerable that projection had to be. And when the lights finally faded, he didn't ask for sympathy or recognition. He left a legacy defined not by headlines, but by consistency, both in performance and in his private defiance. Even today, Raymond Burr remains a paradox. Was he a master of deception or a victim of his time? Was his secrecy self-preservation or quiet rebellion? The answers depend on how you choose to view him. But maybe that's what Burr wanted all along. To be remembered not just as a courtroom legend or a tough detective, but as a man who, in his own quiet way, broke the rules of an industry that demanded perfection and punished difference. A man who lived a life he never fully revealed, but who left just enough behind for us to wonder. And sometimes, it's the story you don't tell that says the most. Raymond Burr was many things: a television titan, a mystery in plain sight, and a man who never stopped shaping his own narrative. From the courtroom cool of Perry Mason to the gritty resolve of Ironside, he played characters who lived for the truth. But off-screen, he spent a lifetime guarding his own. In an era when being different could end your career, Burr chose silence over confession. He created a personal history filled with invented heartbreak and heroism, not to deceive, but to survive. It was a quiet rebellion wrapped in fiction, a defense strategy, You might say, worthy of Perry Mason himself. And yet, that silence said more than any scandal ever could. Burr never asked for applause for the life he led behind scenes. He never sought validation. But the legacy he left behind, on screen and in silence, speaks volumes. He broke ground in disability representation before it was popular. He carried entire shows on his back while fighting illness. And he protected the people he loved from a world that wouldn't have understood. Maybe that's why his story still holds power today. Because it's not just about fame or TV ratings or even the characters we remember. It's about the space between the scenes, the private choices, the quiet defiance, the unseen strength it takes to be who you are in a world that tells you not to be. Raymond Burr didn't just play heroes. In his own quiet, complicated way, he was one